DJ case pulling out his cloud of air. My deck's like 15 cents a card. Mono white like Escobar, flipping the card like Loyal Thor. I used to be a zombie at the bar. Now I puff law. I'm essential like drafting bombs. I got mad spells in my palms. Bird soldiers lucky eagles when I stuff the palm. Guru lands for my mans, I can't afford it. I choose Zendikar. Nonetheless, I'm looking fresher than the average motherfucker at the F&M playing Euro. It's all love, shuffle up. I brought my foiled out Delver from the vault, and I'm going up to motherfuckers with it like, what's up? Nobody cares, they're just staring. We're the nerds in the back and it's apparent, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Let's play. I brought Purple Decks to the party. Paul. I brought Purple Decks to the party. We in the back, playing that cheap shit. Yo, I brought Purple Decks to the party. I brought Purple Decks to the party. In the back, playing that cheap shit. In the front, they're playing limbo or some shit, doing shots. I don't give a fuck. I'm in the back with my eyes on which cards my opponent put back. From the brainstorm, I transformed and mutated and flipped out. Played a couple games and then I dipped out. I got shit to do. I only play a game or two, but yo, feel the agony of defeat while I cast agony war. Passerbys peep the shoes on my feet. I'm wearing some shit, neon green they ain't seen before. I fiend for more, fresh kicks and foils. But tonight we keep it cheap, playing Pauper. Come on, I brought Purple Decks to the party. I brought Purple Decks to the party. We in the back, playing that cheap shit. Yo, I brought Purple Decks to the party. I brought Purple Decks to the party. We in the back, playing that cheap shit.
Yeah, it's MTG Brad of Orzov, and I'm standing outside of his Copa Bank right now. I'm taking donations. I'm taking donations. I'm a syndic. My presence celebrated by the syndicate. Went up to Kaya, said hey,
I'll never hear that, but that's okay.
How is that? Is that better? I think we're good now. Had to clickety-click a couple buttons.
Oh yeah, it's going.
Good. Good. Well, hello. Looks like we got a few people in the chat. I'm here with Mr. Bobby B. Fine from Sanctuary PDH and
What
one of the hosts from the PDH Pod, Dave the Alcadron Vader. Thanks for hanging out with me
It's
tonight
me.
on the Good Friday. Better but quiet. All right, let's crank it up.
Loud
Have a good
noises.
Friday, everyone.
Yeah, I didn't even realize it was Good Friday when we started planning this whole thing. I realized it like 4 hours ago.
I realized just now. Nice. All right.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, we did
I've known that it was Good Friday for a little while.
a little while. You guys got big Easter
Yeah.
plans? I don't think we're doing much, honestly.
Don't have a lot of Easter plans right now, but I mean, my wife just did get ordained as a minister, so
Ooh, all right.
we did some stuff this evening. We went out to. There's a
marry
big
some people?
action. We've married no one.
Oh.
We went out to Faneuil Hall, and we did a big action in protest of the violence in Gaza.
Okay. All right.
I don't know who's watching an assorted 80-ish people in Faneuil Hall to decide whether or not the violence in Gaza should continue or not, but I definitely shouted about it. So
Sure. Yeah.
maybe, yeah.
Loud noises get stuff done.
Loud noises gain attention. What about you, Mr. Bevine? What are you up to this holiday weekend?
I'm gonna do brunch with the family on Easter, and then it's my brother's birthday, so I think we're doing some stuff related to that too. But nothing too crazy. Just some time with family.
Yeah, right on. Nothing wrong with that. Like I
I
said,
like it.
I don't know if we have too much planned, but we'll probably end up doing something. Seems like every holiday we're like, we're not going to do much. We're not going to do anything, and then we end up doing something. So,
Yeah.
but I know I'll be playing some Pauper tomorrow night, and that's about
Yeah,
all I got
yeah.
planned. Yeah. But yeah, cool. We did one of these. I don't know if anyone in the chat was here for the last one, but was it like 2 or 3 months ago? We did a little live Friday night discussion about combo decks with some recent results. It was directly after Gators win, I believe, from Sanctuary 3. And we just sort of talked about combo decks in the meta, what they do in the meta, how to play them, how to play against them, pretty importantly. So we thought we would, and it's kind of funny that it worked out this way. We started planning this episode or this sort of live conversation to talk about mid-range, the archetype of mid-range, maybe some deck talk, what the archetype does for the format. And we started planning this like a week or two before Sanctuary 4.
Yeah.
And it turns out Mr. Papa Popper took down the tournament with mid-range deck, so it works out nicely, very nicely. So
Yeah. I mean, it was very, very timely. It's kind of funny in the context. It's
Just
always
like
been
we planned.
just like we
Yeah.
planned, exactly.
cool and calculated. No,
right.
but like it was funny after all that. There's been this talk about mid-range underperforming and whatnot, and then Ryan's just like, "Yeah, cool, cool story, bro."
Cool story, bro.
Here we go.
Let me show you a 2-mana commander. Let's go.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that, like, if you've ever scrolled through his Mox field, it's just mid-range after mid-range after mid-range, and I love it. Like, I love building decks like that. I love looking at decks that are built that way. But TPI specifically has always intrigued me in a mid-range build because it is 2 mana. Like, we just don't have a lot of 2 mana or, powerful, successful 2 mana mid-range commanders, if you will. And I know TPI can be built combo or aggro or do whatever you want to do, but for it to be successful at the highest levels and be that cheap is pretty impressive, I think.
For sure. Yeah, I'm impressed because I like that. I knew that Ryan was on TPI, and I knew that TPI was very powerful, very successful. The thing that I really appreciate is that I've seen TPI built a lot of different ways. I've seen TPI combo builds that have been very successful in tournaments. I've seen TPI like aggro builds where everyone's just going to be on all the trumpet blasts and stuff.
Right.
So the sort of appeal of both of those builds of TPI, I think, is that they're very, very proactive. Like all of their cards are meant to do a thing, impact the board. We're gonna move forward, advance the game plan, make stuff happen. The thing I love about Ryan's list is everything that I very angrily ranted about in the aftermath of Gators' turn 3 win of Sanctuary 4, where I accused a lot of people of being greedy, of just not playing enough interaction, not playing
Sure.
enough control. Like, if you when you take all the answers out of your deck so that you have more room for Lotus Petals and Simian Spirit Guides, like it's just a race to the bottom.
Right.
And it's like, at that point, it's like who lucks into the combo first. And if someone has the Simian Spirit Guide and the Lotus Petal in their opening hand, and then
Sorry for you. Yeah.
the Reckless Fireweaver and the Vision Charm also in the top 10 cards of their library that game, like, good job, you win. Like, no one else had
Yee.
interaction.
Good job. You
So,
shuffled
like,
well.
see, right, like, and no one else did.
Right.
Like everyone else at the table was too, didn't have any way to stop this. Because the whole thing would have collapsed to a single counterspell, but
Sure.
but no one had the single counterspell and the mana up for it on turn 2, which is, I mean, it's understandable not keeping 2 mana up on turn 2.
Yeah, you just don't. Even though you're playing against a Malcolm combo deck in the final 4 of a tournament, and you should probably mulligan correctly or accordingly. A turn 2 counterspell is just not something that I don't think I would have thought of it.
Yeah.
Like maybe
Right.
hopefully to draw into one or have some interaction later, but you just don't expect that.
Yeah, but so
I
back to
disagree, but go ahead. But yeah.
Bobby knows what's good.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, back to Ryan's deck. Like, seeing TPI be so successful with a deck that is packed with answers.
Mhm.
Like, this TPI plan is just I'm going to have the disruption for whatever everyone's trying to do.
Yep.
I'm gonna when you try to put the freed from the real on something, I've got the lightning bolt for it. When you try to flicker your guy, I've got the counterspell for your flicker. Like, when you try to mess with my stuff, I've got the counterspells to protect my board. And like, just doing this like control plan in the shell where every single one of these interaction pieces also gets you a soldier
Right.
that will accumulate and eventually just take someone out. Like, that feels really powerful, and it's very powerful in a very mid-range kind of way.
Mhm.
And I loved seeing that. I loved seeing a deck do so well that had all these answers in it.
Yeah, when he first built
So-
that deck, he definitely identified the mid-range capacity opportunity there, and it's
Yeah.
really good to see. What do you think, Bobby? You a fan of the TPI?
Yeah, I mean, I liked it. I like answers. I will just hold up 2 mana to deal with something I'm scared of on turn 2. So
Yeah.
Sure.
Smart.
I know Ryan usually deploys TPI early, but it can choose to not, right? Like, it just depends on what's going on in the game contextually.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm a big fan of it. I like control decks. There's a lot of overlap between mid-range and control in a lot of ways.
Sure.
So I like that. And yeah, like you said, TPI, I mean, it won a Philly tournament, a more combo version. It won this. I mean, Ryan's top forward a lot, if not, all of the online tournaments he's played in, I think, or most of them. So yeah, I mean, I was super excited to see it. Over the course of the day, I felt like he was the one player I felt like was playing just like the most responsibly of,
Sure.
throughout the day. So,
I love
mean,
the
it's not
description.
surprising he won.
Yep. And it's got to be exhausting too. There is a lot of decisions in a mid-range deck, especially in multiplayer.
Oh yeah.
Holy cow!
Yeah.
So to take it all the way, that's impressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just wanted to. I'm glad we touched on that. Get everybody's sort of perspective. I also wanted to see what everybody's, I don't know, I guess personal definition of what mid-range is, just to sort of like set the table, if you will, or set what we're talking about here. If you want to start us off, Bobby, I know you've played a lot of like 60 card pauper and other formats, and what, as an overarching sort of definition, what do you think mid-range is?
Yeah, so mid-range, so 60 card mid-range makes a lot more sense to me than multiplayer mid-range. I feel like that's where it gets muddied a lot. When I think of mid-range decks, I think of, kind of early removal, early, I'm gonna deal stuff, and then it has some really efficient threats to help close out the game. And there's still the control. It's like attrition-y, kind of reactive. It's not putting a lot of pressure early, but it has efficient threats to, like, when it wants to turn the corner, it needs to turn the corner, it can turn the corner.
Yeah.
Thinking of like 60 card, like Popper, Core Skyfisher is kind of in that, you're just, it's an efficient 2/3 flyer. It's going to end the game, but it's not ending the game quickly. It's just there. You're playing lots of bolts
A little
and
bit of value.
you know,
Yep.
galvanic blast in that kind of 60 card deck. You know, thinking back to like standard modern, you know, Jund is the mid-range deck that comes to everyone's mind. I think, you know, whether it's Bloodbraid Elves or Hunt Masters of the Fells and Lightning Bolts and Abrupt Decays and all that stuff. So yeah, I mean it's like a control-y aggro deck that kind of, in my mind, is really focused on early control while establishing some efficient threats along the way and trying to control the game. So it's a weird hybrid that I struggle with, but
yeah, I think that hybridness of it is why a lot of people struggle to define it. But what do you got, Dave? How do you define mid-range when you're looking at one or trying to build one?
That's a really good question because on my way home, I was telling my partners that I was gonna go do a thing about mid range, and they're like, "Oh, what's mid range?" And I was like, "That's a really good question. How do you explain?" And the analogy that I sort of come back to a lot is if you imagine the game of Magic like a race. Some people some people, you know, doing this race. Everyone's going to start at the starting line at 0, and the game ends when someone crosses the finish line. Some people are just going to try and sprint for the finish line, and those are your aggro decks and your turbo combo decks. Some people are going to try to win the race by shooting everyone else in the legs over and over again until they literally cannot move, and then they're going to saunter casually across the finish line. Those are your control decks, and the mid-range decks are the decks that want to do a little of both. And I think the most important sort of defining characteristic here is that it's not going to be a deck that has some aggro elements and a deck that has some control elements. It's going to be a deck that can, depending on the matchup, pivot back and forth between those roles.
Yes.
And that's a definition
really
that I
important.
think applies much better to 1v1 games. Because like to me, the quintessential mid-range thing is like, if you square up against an aggro deck, you want to be able to pivot into the control position, where you have enough control and tempo and like slow down and like kneecap these people, elements of your deck that you can be the control deck in that situation. And then round 2, you square up against a control deck. You want to have enough aggro pieces that you can pivot into the aggro role, where you have your efficient threats and your fast pressure, and you're gonna, dome the face, send, hit for life totals, and be the aggro deck at that table. So like being able to pivot back and forth between being the control and the aggro, depending on the matchup. That to me is the quintessential mid-range goal.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to try and port that paradigm into a 4-player game. Because you have 3 opponents.
Right, and if you got one of each archetype at the table, what do you do?
Right. Like you're not gonna, you can't be aggro at the control deck at the same time that you are being control against the aggro deck. Like there has to be some sort of like inter-table political dynamic happening there, which is why I think the definition gets so muddled in PDH. But it is going to try and walk the line between aggro and control. You're jogging through the race while also throwing sticks at people's legs.
Trying to trip them up a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's like anyone who gets ahead of you, kneecap them. Anyone behind you, as long as they stay behind you, you're good.
Yeah,
exactly.
You're not worried about the people behind you. Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect.
No, I think that was an excellent analogy. I don't know that I would have come up with that. That was a good one. Yeah, I think that labels it pretty well, perfectly. And you're right. You're both right. Like that's where the waters get really muddy in PDH when trying to build mid-range, when thinking about taking it to a tournament. Like, you mentioned the 1v1 matchups, and mid-range is great for that. Bobby, you mentioned Jund, and that in my mind that is like the ultimate mid-range deck. It's just trying to trade 1-mana spells for your creatures. It's trying to trade 1-mana spells for your face. It's just trying to do card for card, 1-for-1 trades. It's not super value oriented. It's just gonna grind you down until the way is clear for its 2-power creature or its Tarmogoyf or whatever to smack you around a little bit. And I think that's very much what mid-range is, and I think a lot of that is why TPI has such a good time in this particular meta is because it can create that wall of blockers. It can create all those creatures just to kind of like, okay, if I tap out or what have you, I still got these creatures to protect me. You know what I mean? Like it's got the value built into it.
Yeah, I think part of what, and maybe this is more unique to PDH than like EDH or multiplayer in general. Part of it's power level, right? Like we don't have the same type of just like high impact threats that, look at modern gen, right? Like Scavenging Ooze is a hell of a card.
Right.
Huntmaster of the Fells, Thragtusk, Tarmogoyf,
Right.
we have some. I'm not going to act like we have none. Like they exist. You can play them, but they're not the same, especially when you have to realize you have to kill 3 people instead of just 1. So it's hard to have something that is so high impact and symmetrically high impact that it's taking out everyone equally or quickly. So it's in my opinion, in my head, like most mid-range decks are going to skew more towards the control-y side of things in multiplayer formats.
Yeah, even if you're aware of it or not, I think it's something that just sort of happens throughout the game. Yep.
And then but then there are more aggressive ones, and in my head that's such like slow aggro. So that it's just like, where do you draw those lines? I don't know. It's kind of just a feel thing, I think. But I think the more successful ones will be the ones that lean towards control as opposed to aggro. Personally.
Yep. I just had a thought and I totally lost it. What was I going to say? Oh, I don't know. But yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. They do end up, and there's a lot, to me anyway, there's a pretty big difference between actual mid-range, like actually building a mid-range, sitting down to do just exactly that, and building like a value pile. Like you see so many decks that are just like, I built this off of, cards that I like and cards I have laying around, and it's mid-range. Like it's not, I think that word gets lumped into, well, I'm not playing Counterspell, and I'm not playing Goblins, so it must be mid-range. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, yeah, I think the terminology gets a little mixed up, but it's understandable completely.
Yeah, like a lot of times people just be like, oh, I just play like middle-sized creatures. I'm going to end the game with them eventually, right? Like that means mid-range.
Wow.
Middle-sized, yep, I like that. So it is hard. We do have, and since so much of Magic's history and the limited formats and stuff is built around, quote unquote, these mid-range creatures, building a mid-range deck in limited or putting mid-range archetypes into the standard format. So much of Magic is built around mid-range decks that we have a ton of options at the uncommon rarity to put in our command zone. It's just rare to find one that's actually like super potent in a multiplayer game as far as like trying to be actually competitive.
And that's where commanders come in.
It is. Yep.
So, which going back to TPI, like TPI is a good example that it's cheap, it's efficient, and it's giving you things early and late game, right? So like the tokens matter early game, they matter late game. Arguably equally, or they can be, you can build the deck to where they're just as effective early or late. And so I think that's what the goal of that deck is, to capitalize on, hey, early game, these are going to be expendable fodder just to, for my spells or to chump, or, just to stay alive. And then late game, they're how I'm killing people or, how I'm fueling my Ashnod's Altar combo or, whatever that may be.
Right.
That's the pivot.
That is the pivot, 100%. And I think what I was thinking about this earlier today too, and because I build, obviously, surprise to no one, I build a lot of Orzhov decks, whether they're control or whether they're aristocrats or even, Orzhov mid-range or hashtag value pile, whatever you want to call them. And I was thinking about this a lot today, and I couldn't come up with a better term other than cheat. But I think a lot of the reason Orzhov decks struggle to be successful mid-range decks is because they don't inherently, the Orzhov color pair does not know how to cheat things into play. Like TPI gets all the tokens for free. You know what I'm saying? Simic gets all the mana for free. Mono Blue has all the interaction for, not for free, but it's got all the interaction. And I think that's where something like Orzhov tends to struggle with mid-range, because it just doesn't it's got to spend that Jund type mana value. It's got to spend the card for card interaction, the card, 2-for-1 sort of thing, 1-for-1 sort of thing. And I think that's where it really tends to struggle, whereas TPI has that inherent built-in value that can lead you towards a mid-range build because you know that you have those tokens. Like you said, Bobby, you have them in the early game, you have them to turn the corner in the late game.
Two things.
Mhm.
First, welcome Too Much Do. It's delightful to
Hey,
have
what's
you
up,
here.
dude? Yeah,
What up?
absolutely.
Second, I think that Orzhov can cheat. It's just that when Orzhov is cheating value out of things, that value does not come in the form of additional pieces of cardboard that you get to put on the table.
Yeah. Mhm.
The value that Orzhov cheats constantly is in the extort and Mirkwood Bats and LS Ilkor.
Yep.
Like it's gonna send that value directly at life totals.
Right.
And so you're gonna see that reflected in people like, moving their dice around, but you don't get to put a piece of paper into play
Yeah.
because
True.
of
True.
it.
True.
So
Yep.
I think that we did see there was a Rags for Riches tournament once where didn't Elas
Mhm.
take it down?
Yeah, I think right
And
after
Elas
it was available in paper, pretty much.
was
Yeah.
that a mid range deck?
Yeah, it was mid-rangey.
Hmm.
Okay.
I don't remember the exact list. I'd have to go pull it up. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of mid range that Orzhov wants to be doing is just like, aristocrats, life, extorting life draining kind
Yeah.
of cheating.
I think why I get where you're coming from, Brad, with like the cheat word. I think part of it is when you think about. I mean, this is just comparing TPI. There are other examples, but there's a flexibility in the tokens, right? Like they're blockers,
Right.
they're attackers,
They're
they're sack
artifacts.
fodder, they fuel spells, they're for bargain or whatnot, right?
Right.
Like they do all this stuff. And the Orzhov is more, it's more just, hey, this is just life total, like manipulation, right? Like
Mhm.
there's not a lot of flexibility with it, so you're
Hmm.
more honed in and locked in on, hey, this is my lane. I'm stuck in it. It is what it is.
Yeah,
It
flexibility
can
is a good
still
word.
do that, but
Yeah, it definitely
Yeah.
is a little more rigid than most mid-range builds you'll find. It doesn't.
I'm
Orzhov struggles to pivot, as it were.
I'm always shocked at how versatile these tokens are. Like when
Yeah.
I read TPI, I'm like, oh, it's just a bunch of 1/1s, and then I see like, what's that? The stupid the blue spells that are like way overvalued but make you tap a bunch of creatures. And I'm just like, okay, sure. Like I guess TPI gets ancestral recall that no one else does.
Yeah, Meeting
And
of
there's the
Minds.
Meeting of Minds, shared discovery,
Shared Discovery. Yeah, that's a good one.
reverse engineer, all these things. Yeah.
Yep.
reverse engineer. Yeah, like this is so much. Like the tokens are value, but there's so much more value than they look like,
Mm-hmm.
and they look like a lot of value, and
Yeah.
that's I think where it gets out of hand.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I mean by using the word cheat. I'm sure there's a better word, but that's what I mean by it. Is like when you look at a Orzhov deck, for example, it's not getting that sort of value out of anything it does. Like it's gonna have to go, like you said, Dave. It's gonna have to go at the numbers, at the life totals, at the
Yeah.
face, at the heart and soul of the other players. Like there's no cheating a bunch of tokens or treasures or land auras and all this mana into play. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle with those type of builds, where I struggle with those types of builds, because that's what I like to play, but I am super reluctant to take them into a competitive environment because I know the pitfalls. Like Orzhov mid-range is fantastic deck 1v1. That's what it wants.
Mhm.
That's how it plays, that's what it wants. But when you got 2, 3 other people at the table, that's where it really begins. Like, and it'll still be strong. It'll still kill somebody. It'll still kill 2 players maybe, but it just struggles to close out the game in a symmetrical way, I think.
That's totally fair.
Yeah.
I have a series of questions
Yeah.
that I have come up with as I was preparing for this talk. I was thinking like what kinds of clever, insightful things can I say about mid-range
Right.
on this stream? And I realized that like I had more questions about mid-range than I had clever, insightful things to say about it. So
Mhm.
I want to pitch these questions to the two of you and
Sure.
to everyone in chat. Please tell me what you think about this. The first one, I think of mid-range as sort of the balance in between aggro and control, which are about the deck's sort of like timing and proactiveness.
Sure.
I don't think control is part of that spectrum. I think no, sorry, not control, not the forget that. I don't think combo is on that spectrum. I think that you can make a combo deck that feels aggro, like we saw in Sanctuary 4 with the Malcolm Kedis. That to me that is an aggro combo deck, turbo combo.
Turbo combo, sure.
Is in this metaphor I used earlier. That's the deck that's just going to sprint for the finish line.
Right.
You can make combo decks that are super heavy on control.
Mhm.
That's where I think my combo decks fall. I have a Ruin Crab combo deck, CPDH, super dumb.
Well, you always
very
talk about
controlled.
too, like the earlier days of PDH,
Yeah.
when it was just
Yeah.
grindy ass 2-hour, combo control games.
Yeah. I think the Tatyovas and
Mhm.
is it Guild Mages to me are very much control combo decks. They're control decks with a combo finish.
Mhm.
So the thing that I don't hear is mid-range combo. Is that a thing?
Bobby?
So this is something Puzzle Box and I have talked about.
Okay.
Puzzle's primer on Gretchen, I believe he put as mid-range combo or something, just to prove a point. But I think it's somewhat accurate too, right? So like when I
Son, what point is he trying to prove here? Is this
you
is
can
this a
just-
contentious question?
That he can
I don't
type
know.
words.
I don't know how. I won't speak for him, but the labeling thing, I feel like it gets overblown at the end of the day. But
Okay.
it's good for guiding some discussion. So
Sure.
so Gretchen is not a controlled. It's not answering everything, right? It's not trying to stop everyone from doing everything the whole game.
Mhm.
It's drawing cards, it's ramping, and it's stopping things that lose it the game, right? It doesn't care if other people do some stuff. It just wants to not lose.
Correct.
Which is what we're talking about, mid-range. Hey, I don't want the people in front of me to do anything. If you stay behind me, you're cool, right? So if you want to
Sure.
So Gretchen
What's up, Mitsu?
kind of does that while, working towards a combo finish. Whereas, control decks, like I think of, like Cormella or Malcolm Breaches, they're more control-y combo decks. They're doing a lot more active in stopping people from doing things. They don't even want people to establish engines. They don't want people to get a leg up. They're just worried about, slowing the game down to where they can combo and have protection too.
Right.
Because they're usually slower combo decks. They can maybe have fast wins, but they're aiming for the long game. They're playing these, symmetrical like edicts, wraths, all this stuff. Floodgate,
Mhm.
it's a control combo deck. It wins the game with Ghostly Flicker eventually.
Yeah.
Eventually,
So,
right.
but yeah, so I think there
Eventually, yeah.
can be. I really like, combo is usually described as like an overall archetype, but I think it's more of a sub archetype, like you were talking about, Dave. I really like that like differentiator. Like there's control combo, there's aggro combo or turbo combo. Maybe not in my head aggro means combat, but turbo
that's
combo. And I think combo decks exist on kind of all along that spectrum.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. Especially if the combo in the deck is one of the main or the main win condition. I think you can be any variety of combo deck, really.
Awesome. That has very thoroughly answered that question. I suppose that I would tend to agree. I think that there is mid-range combo. If I were forced to do so, that's how I would categorize my Marsh Crocodile list.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Speaking of categorizing my own lists,
And I think too,
Many-
before we move
Oh,
too
yeah,
much further,
please.
I think too is also how you're using the definition of mid-range in the title mid-range combo. Like Bobby a minute ago said, well, when I think of aggro, I think of, beat downs with combat.
Yeah.
When I think of mid-range, I think of turning that corner to beat you down via combat.
Okay.
If that makes sense, you know what I mean? So it's hard to like parse out mid-range combo in my head, but it does make sense. Like
Sure.
as a concept, basically.
Yeah, I'm trying to I'm making a conscious effort in my own word choice and word use to sort of differentiate between like aggro and mid-range and
Mhm.
like combo and combat.
Right.
I do kind of have that association. I'm trying to break the association because like I feel like to me Zada functions like a combo deck,
Mhm.
even though it combos with the attack step.
Right.
And like I do think that there are combo decks that run enough interaction and control that they like in this sort of like race analogy, they would fall into the mid-range thing. So I'm that's a thing I'm working on. I don't know if it's wise, if it'll catch on. Language is always evolving, and it's
Yeah.
good to clarify what we mean when we say certain things.
Yeah. I think Cormello was a good example of that, though. That was a good reference.
Yeah.
Love me, Carmella.
Second question I have
Yeah.
comes back to something that Brad and I did with Ryan. I don't know, time is fake. 6 years ago, whenever the PDH Pod was going through its 3x3 series of 4 archetypes,
Mhm.
where we were talking about like our view from 5,000 feet, 50,000 feet, whatever we said, where we're looking down at the archetype, and instead of bringing like individual specific decks, we were going to bring like categories of decks.
Right.
When we did our mid-range episode in that series, I talked a lot about Vohar.
Mhm.
And then, like, as soon as we finished, like a month later, I was like, wait, that was dumb. I think my Vohar list is actually just a control list. And then I played with it some more, and I'm like, no, it's definitely mid-range. And now I'm like, is it though? What if it's control? I don't know where that line lives. I have no idea
Yeah.
where is the delineation between control and mid-range. And like I started thinking about this particular question about 15 minutes ago when Bobby said mid-range skews more towards control than aggro.
Mhm.
What is it important? Do we need to delineate those things? Can I have a mid-range control list? Like,
I'll let Brad go first.
That is a tough one. I don't know that we do need to separate those things or have like strict lines drawn in the sand necessarily. And I know I think Bobby might have said it when we first started, maybe even just like in passing without even realizing it. But it's to me mid-range, and this is definitely not like textbook or how a lot of people view it, but mid-range is definitely a feel thing to me. Like if I build a deck or I play a deck, I can tell you that it's mid-range, but I don't really know why it's mid-range. I just know that it's not control and it's too slow to be aggro. But I can look at a deck or I can build a deck and think like for example, like I would consider at least my version of Rilsa to be mid-range control. Like it's going to kill you via combat whenever Rilsa's extra text, extra rules box gets online. But until then, I'm going to control you. I'm going to try to control the board as much as possible. I'm not going to do that with Boros, with lightning bolts and galvanic blasts and things like that. Or is it interaction spells? I'm going to do that on the Dimir side of things with removal and hard counter spells. So I think something like that would fall into the category of mid-range control because I have no combos built into the deck. I'm ultimately trying to win via combat, with the +5/+0, which can get really stupid, and it can just take somebody out of nowhere.
5 is such a huge number.
It's such a huge number. It's ridiculous. So yeah, I think something like that might fall into that category for me personally. Anyway, I don't know if it's I don't know if you can look at a list of decks and say, oh, that's mid-range control. Oh, that's mid-range control. You know what I mean? I don't know if you can pick them out of a lineup. But I can tell you by feel and by the way I sort of built the deck that Rilsa is that way for me. I don't think that directly answers your question, but
I think that's good. That has brought me closer to an understanding.
Okay. What do you think, Bobby?
But
So in my head, mid-range and control, like mid-range and control are separate. You can have a control leading mid-range deck and an aggro leading mid-range deck. In my head, what you just described is just a control deck, though, right? Like, if you don't have both, like, if you can't win fast, and what is fast, whatever, you decide that. I'm not going to get into that. But, like, if you can't win fast, I don't think you can be a mid-range deck because you don't have that ability to, have that side of the game. Like, you don't have the turn 2 Tarmogoyf, turn 3 Scavenging Ooze, Pump, turn 4 Blood Braid, Haste into some other giant thing, right? Like,
So for you, there is an element of speed in the definition of mid-range.
Because it's that adaptability, right? That kind of Dave I think mentioned most, or maybe I'm now just completely forgetting things happened 5 minutes ago.
The pivoting, yeah.
But like you have to have both, right? Like if you're not able to capitalize and do that early win, or like at least very aggressive early start, I think you lean more towards the control side. And I guess that's why I'm thinking most mid-range decks fall more towards the control side, because it's so hard to do the aggressive thing unless you're like focused on doing the aggressive thing in a multiplayer PDH format.
Sure.
So maybe that's why my brain's working that way, because I can't think of a deck that can really pose a really aggressive. I mean, like TPI is an example, right? Like it can get kind of aggressive with just a ton of tokens early and a ton of burn. And then it can, if it's a combo version, it can threaten win early. Now with slime against humanity decks, like those are potentially like really scary early if they have some like degenerate way to mill a bunch of cards. Like, so those decks can do both. And so I find those to be kind of in the mid-range category. But if you don't have that early game, I don't think you don't have the potential for that early game, I should say.
And you're talking about like early game pressure.
Yeah, and that could even mean winning, right? If you want to go back into like combo, like Gretchen can win on turn 2. It requires like the perfect a billion cards or whatever, but like it has the threat to win early, but it's also well equipped to go to the late game. And so decks that can do both, right? That's where the mid range is. And if I feel like it's hard to do both in our format with 3 opponents.
Yes.
I think the 3 opponents is really like the biggest part. I know we talked about at the beginning. The multiplayer aspect just changes so much of what mid range.
Oh my god, so much. Yeah.
So the thing that made me start to think that Vohar was in fact mid range and not control was I played a game recently on the Sanctuary FNM with Vohar, where I was able to very swiftly run out a Madness, Weirded Vampire, and a Madness Twins of Mauer State. And I was turning them sideways constantly just to pressure people's life totals, while I was turning Vohar sideways to pressure people's life totals that way.
Sure.
And I ended up, I feel like I got a control flavored win in that game just by clearing the board with Crypt Rats, and life totals were low enough that Crypt Rats and Corrupt was enough to seal the deal for me. But like just turning those little Madness guys and like Kitchen Imp feels like a very mid-range card in that deck.
Yeah, for
sure.
sure.
But then it's all, but it always feels like a control finish because I'm going for death by Fruit of Tizerus, death by whatever stupid life drain thing I end up in with my hand in on turn 14.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I'm back and forth on it.
And I think you just summed up why mid-range is hard to classify in this format. Like you were talking about the kitchen Imp feels very mid-rangey. Bobby mentioned earlier, Core Skyfisher is definitely a mid-rangey type creature. We got things like Bone Picker that can function as a mid-range option. Like there's just so many, I don't know, there's so many different ways to go with it. It is hard to classify, but I think a good example of it is, Bobby, you were talking about sort of like the speed and the impact that TPI can have as early as turn 2 with all these tokens and stuff, and stretch that into the late game, but it's built as a mid-range deck. Where on sort of the flip side of that, in the same tournament, Gatorbait was on Azra and just had a really bad day. I mean, I don't know how else to put it, and that's a very mid-range deck, or at least the way he's built it is very mid-range. So I think there is something to be said for how quickly you can get what you're trying to do online, and TPI is just super fast at that.
Yeah, I mean, there's always matchups and stuff too, right? Like,
yeah, for sure.
And what you draw, variants, all that fun stuff, and part of that is deck construction. Part of that's the colors you have access to. We talked about flexibility, right? Like Rakdos, Rakdos can't interact with the stack like Izzet can. Like blue is a hell of a drug. So like there's just differences there. But yeah, I mean like Azra is a good example too. Like it plays a ton of removal. It plays like Azra alone is an efficient creature, and it makes all these other creatures super efficient. So it can do the early game, and like I think he was running a lot of discard, which is like that's impacting people pretty substantially early. Maybe not life total wise, but like resource wise.
Right, trying to
And
slow
so
down
then-
the game. Yep.
And then because Azra is just like drawing you cards forever, it's well equipped to go in the late game because you've pressured everyone's resources early, and then you're the only one like net positive on resources later in the game because you just have an engine in your commander. So
Right.
I think it is another commander that fits that archetype, like what I would envision the archetype to be, or definition to be pretty well.
Yeah.
But back to Dave's original point, which I did not answer at all, which was, is there, where do we draw the line? How do we draw that line? Is it worth drawing the line? I think it's, you could, I mean, we've been doing this already, right? Like we can't figure out what mid-range means. So it's like an exercise in futility. Like at the end of the day, what someone calls mid-range could be control. Someone can call it aggro. Someone can call it Voltron, right? Like, I don't think it's worth getting too hung up on it. I know some people like to, and I think there is some value to it in terms of, hey, once you know something is mid-range, it means something. Clay talked about this, I think, when he and I don't remember who else was there on one of F&M streams, maybe Lobert, I think. We were talking about mid-range, and he has been a big proponent of like defining what these archetypes mean in PDH.
Yeah.
Because of the guide data and all of that. And I think his reason was the only reason I've really felt like there's any reason to worry about archetype labels. And it's because it means something to people who are coming at this from another format or from another place, right? Like someone joins a server, right? Or someone tweets, oh, hey, I want to get into PDH. I like mid-range decks. What should I play? It's like, well, they know what mid-range means, and it means something to them. So, or they say, hey, I want to play this commander. What does it play like? And you say, oh, it's a mid-range deck. They have some background as to what that means from 60 card or from whatever,
conceptually.
EDH. So there's value there. But I think there's also like, you'll drive yourself insane if you think too much about it and try to like establish clear lines. Because I don't think it's easy to do.
Yeah, totally agree. It's not easy at all. It's, and two, I think mid-range, I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I think mid-range is just sort of like a catch-all for I'm not trying to win via combo, and I'm not playing hyper-aggressive, 1/1s with combat tricks or battle card goblins or Azada or something like that. I'm playing something in between. So to me, it's mid-range. I think there's a lot of that going on, which is justifiable. I mean, heck, I've done that too. Like my Risen Reef deck, it wins via combat on turn 10 or later, but I don't think that's a mid-range deck. All I'm doing is just casting creatures and eventually swinging sideways. There's not a lot of interaction. There's like 3 or 4 pieces of interaction total in the entire deck. If anything, it's more of a Typal or Kindred deck, which, I mean, that's a whole other conversation right there, really. But
Sniff gets it.
I would call your Reef deck Battle Cruiser.
Sure. Yeah, I love that term. I use that tag quite a bit on Moxfield.
Let me see what Sniff is saying. I don't like labeling decks. It only has value in deck lists and whatnot. I think decks should just do what they do because, as we've seen in the other Discord a ton, I don't know what the other Discord is. People have too many different definitions of what mid-range, control, aggro are, and it just leads up to shit flinging.
Flinging poo. All right.
Yeah,
I do love a good monkey show.
Yeah,
I haven't used that verbiage to describe that, but yeah, like I do feel like archetypes are used to like weaponize. I don't know why. Like they're just like people who are like team mid range. Ryan's one of those people like team mid range, and then there's puzzles like team combo's the only way, right? Like everyone has like what they like, right? And it becomes like a versus archetype 1 versus archetype 2 versus archetype 3
Well, and
thing.
it could also be just like a pride thing. Like a lot of people I talk to, or an ego thing necessarily. Like a lot of the people I talk to that play or came from 60 card formats to PDH or still play both of them. When you're in a competitive 60 card format like Pauper or Modern or what have you, it is nice to understand that there is what mid-range is, what control is. There's not I mean, unless you go further back into the formats, there's not a ton of combo decks, but they're out there. What control decks are, what aggro decks are, and there is something about beating your chest and saying, "Oh, I'm mid-range and I can beat your control deck." There is something about having that platform of mid-range to stand on with your deck, and like Jund, that was the whole meme that Jund has become, is like this mid-range deck. When in doubt, Jund them out. Like that's a whole thing because of what it does. And I just don't think that mentality necessarily transfers well to this format or to EDH, what have you.
I gotta say, I do really love it when people get into these like hypothetical like battles. When people are like, I love the enthusiasm that they start with. Someone shows up in the Discord and they're like, "Oh, I found this line. I think it's really interesting. I want to do this line." And someone else is like, "Well, your line loses to counterspell,
Yeah.
idiot." And someone's like, "Well, what if I dispel your counterspell?" And there's this whole hypothetical game happening like in the Discord server, and it's like did people do this about like martial arts 500 years ago? Is that what kata are? Like people are just being like, "Oh, I would attack your face with an axe," and somebody would be like, "Oh, I have a spear. I would get you first." Like,
But
how
I
did
have a
this?
shield. Like,
Right, people just sit around drinking? Like, are these arguments timeless? Like,
it must be. It must be.
is it just part of human nature? I think, and
Yeah,
like,
I think so.
I've definitely seen it with like specific lines and like specific decks, and like there are certain people who are a lot more I will politely and I will diplomatically use the word militant than some other people about proving the righteousness of their cause. But like
Mhm.
I can definitely imagine these battles happening over the archetypes as well instead of specific lines of play.
Yeah.
So yeah, having being able to wear your team's jersey
Yes.
and your team's, I don't know, cheese hat #1
Yeah. Big
hand
foam
sign. I don't
finger.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, the foam finger. Yeah, like
Yeah.
being able to do that certainly is a great reason to have these distinctions.
So I think a lot of
But
that
I
stems from those 60 card formats, at least in my experience, anyway.
for sure. I feel like you very thoroughly answered my question about this. I am inclined to agree with Bobby that I think that our PDH midrange does skew a lot more towards control
Mhm.
than aggro. I think finding a deck that is properly on the aggro side of midrange would be kind of a challenge. That said, I think that there's probably a lot of value in considering this as a spectrum rather than as boxes.
Sure. Yeah.
And I feel comfortable being on the spectrum in between mid-range and control
Mhm.
with my Vohar list, and like exactly where it falls is going to change based on the game and what I'm feeling that day.
Right.
And yeah, so perfect. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Of course.
Uh, you have one more topic that I want to bring up.
Let's do it.
If we still want to listen to Dave start fights.
I
Always.
love listening to Dave starting fights because then I'm not the one starting fights. So.
Perfect. Yeah, I don't know if there were like specific things the two of you wanted to talk about tonight, but I've got at least one more.
Mhm.
I was listening to the esteemed and honestly very wise Lobert
Mhm.
talk about some things recently. And one of the things that Lobert has recently put out into the world that has stuck with me and lived in my brain rent free for a little while now is that he feels that combo and aggro decks have sort of an inbuilt advantage insofar as their win condition is in the name. Like the thing that they are trying to do, the thing that they are named after, is the process by which they win the game.
Okay.
Whereas if you're talking about a control deck, like the thing that a control deck wants to do is going to stop other people from winning the game. But then once you've done that, you still need to come up with a way that you yourself can win the game.
Right.
Like stopping other people from winning the game isn't enough. You have to do more than just the control maneuver.
Hmm.
And he feels like those decks, by virtue of having to sort of split their attention between the thing they want to do and then eventually closing the game as well, are sort of at an inherent disadvantage in the format. Control was, I think, the big one that was mentioned here, and I can definitely see that. I feel like control has been struggling lately in the CPDH guide data. But midrange was also kind of lumped into that category as something that doesn't inherently inbuilt into the name isn't a strategy for closing the game and ending and making you cross that finish line.
That's a really
And
good point.
I wanted to hear your thoughts on this.
So first thought is just you wait for this Q1 CPH guide report because I think control's
Yeah?
gonna look really good because that's like all I've been playing.
Nice. Well,
Not to brag, no. But no, I think control. So Laubert's overall point, I think there is some merit to that. I mean, I'm obviously on team combo is king. You get to kill everyone at once in one foul swoop. What's not to love? Aggro's similar, maybe not all at once, but fast. I don't know if I fully buy into that, right? Because we're talking about, you want the deck to do both, and to some extent, I agree with, if you're a jack of all trades, you're a master of none, right? Like you have that diverted focus, but it also just varies based on the deck. Like you can have a deck that has a very clear win con for a mid-range deck that plays both, right? Like TPI is pretty clear what it's going to do. It's going to make tokens and it's going to turn those into damage, whether it's via pingers or whether it's attacking or, makeshift munitions, whatever.
Mhm.
Like it's pretty clear on how it's going to win. It's not, it can look a little different, but I think that adaptability is what makes it stronger. It varies. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just like, it depends. The normal, dodge answer. But I think there is something there. Like you have one thing, and you're doing it and you're focused on doing it. So every decision, you're making fewer decisions, right? You're like, all right, my decision is I'm going to win by attacking your face in quickly. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to try to combo off quickly. So I'm going to do that. Whereas mid-range decks have to adapt to the table more than those decks. Every deck has to adapt. Every deck has to, take everything into it. But
if I can summarize your response to Robert right now, would it be too long didn't read, skill issue?
Yeah.
Get good?
Just get better, really.
Get better. Come on, son.
Make better decisions.
Right.
Can't wait for the next Robert video where I get called out at the beginning now.
Yeah,
saying
Robert's going to make a reaction video to this stream here. It's great.
I
Thanks,
love
Bobby.
Robert's videos so much.
Yeah, they're great.
Yeah.
They're great. No, I think that's a really good point. It is hard to, I think, sort of expanding on what Lauber said, and I kind of agree to a certain extent. It's an abstract enough thought process that I love it. Like if you walk up to someone or at your LGS or in Spell Table or the LFG channels and, they're like, what are you playing? And I'm like, oh, control. I don't tell them my commander, but I tell them control. They know exactly what they're in store for the most part. If I say aggro, they're going to probably have a few commanders in their mind, but they're going to understand what an aggro deck is. But if I just say, just some mid-range deck, that could literally be almost anything. There's no identifier to mid-range. If that makes sense.
That it does. And it leads me towards another question, but I want to. Was that your complete and unabridged response to Robert? I don't want to cut you off.
No. I had something else, but I don't remember what it was now. It was something along the same lines, but
I had a note too, but you finish your thought, Brad. Sorry, I interrupted.
No. I think it's gone. I think that train has left the station.
One thing, and this might, I don't know how related your next thought is, Dave. So if I end up completely sidetracking us, I apologize. But one thing, you brought up with how Robert mentioned, or maybe it's just your wording, this focus on winning, like aggro and combo, they're just so focused on winning, right? Like, and mid-range is focused on control, like adapting. Control is focused on adapting.
Mhm.
For as much as that's a benefit to those decks, recently I've also seen it be a huge weakness to those decks. Like they're in competitive specifically, I guess, there's been this like narrative and focus that, oh, your deck has to be focused on winning first and foremost. And I think what has gotten lost in the shuffle a little bit, and we kind of saw it with that Malcolm win we've talked about countless times at this point, part of winning is not losing. And I think people are playing interaction suites that don't take that into account. Like there's lots of protection spells, lots of dive downs, Mizium skins, Vines stops other people too, but lots of I'm going to protect my thing, but not lots of I'm going to stop your thing. And so we get to those like borderline uninteractive games where people just don't because they're so focused on, oh, I'm going to focus on what I need to do to win. And then they lose because they didn't have anything to stop the other person from winning. And so when you brought up that, like, focused on, like, they're so focused on winning thing, I've just seen that like backfire a ton. Like, and you can be focused on that, like turbo, like that's fine. That's a completely okay play style to have if you want. Like, not my cup of tea, but I'm not gonna yuck someone else's yum.
Right.
Like you do you, but you gotta go in knowing that's the weakness of your deck, and that is bound to happen. Like if someone tries to do something, you don't have a lot to do. Just an observation.
Yeah, I think that's an overall sort of weakness with mid-range as a whole. Like you sit down at any unknown pod of 3 other decks and almost guaranteed that one of those decks is going to be a weakness for you. Whereas a really good control deck walks into a random table with confidence, knowing, or at least believing, that their deck can control all 3 other decks. Zada walks in thinking they can take down all 3 players in a certain amount of time. Whereas mid-range, like you almost have to understand that one of those players is going to do something that you cannot handle, you can't interact with, and that you're just going to struggle with, period.
Yeah, like Zada's a good example of like, yeah, this deck's aggro. It's good because it knows what it's doing. It's focused on what it's doing. But it also knows that if Zada gets counterspelled the first 2 times it casts, your game's probably over. Like you're not doing a whole lot after that.
Yeah.
And you have a bunch of 1/1s, and those aren't exciting when they aren't drawing you like 18 cards also, and all these like awkward cantrips.
Right.
1/1s. Don't you mean walls?
Yeah, I guess
That's
what I heard.
If I deeply misunderstood what Zada's about?
Right. Unless you're Dave, who has walls Zada, but
walls aplenty.
Walls,
but even
walls
then,
Zada, best Zada, come for me.
Heck yeah.
I mean, you have the same thing though, right? Like you really can't win with a bunch of walls if your Zada gets countered. So it applies.
All right, what else
But
you
yeah,
got, Dave?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that I think that's an excellent point. I think that whole discussion, I think, is an excellent answer to this question. Really, really in-depth look at what's going on there. The only other like thought that I wanted to add, which I think is pretty topical on here, is that we've talked a little bit lately about a little bit lately.
Yeah, sure.
Words.
It works.
Decks that are focused on winning. And I just wanted to add that I think that there's a lot of decks that don't need to fall into this aggro versus mid-range versus control spectrum. When I was, on the way over here, I was explaining the mid-range thing to my partners, and one of the questions came up, like what kind of decks do you play? Like, do you play aggro, or do you play control, or do you play mid-range? And I had to sit there for a minute and think, my decks don't do any of those things. Like, most of my decks are going to start at the starting line of this race, and like they're not going to try to go fast, and they're not going to try to kneecap other people. They're going to try to do a silly walk.
Yeah,
like
they're gonna stop at the concession stand. They're gonna hit the playground.
Right?
Yeah,
like they're gonna. You ever seen the Ministry of Silly Walks? They're gonna pirouette sideways, like away from the race entirely, and just try to do goofy, not like, and that's okay. Like, I think that this is a really important categorization for competitive play. Because in competitive play, you definitely do either want to win or stop other people from winning, some combination of both, ideally, if you're doing well. Like, this is not a categorization that has to apply to every deck.
Right.
And like, you
Yep.
do not need to try and bring this into casual. Like, if you want to, play a Riptide Chimera deck, and like, it doesn't matter if you win or lose, you just want to like do cool things with bouncing auras back to your hands over and over again.
hmm
And that's fine. It doesn't like, you don't have to look at this Riptide Chimera deck and be like, well, it's not aggro because it's not going fast, and it's not control because I can't stop anything. It must be mid-range. Like, no, I don't think
Right.
that deck is mid-range. I think that deck is goofy nonsense.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was. That's kind of what. That is a good way to say what I was trying to say earlier. Is they're like, well, it's not aggro and it's not combo or control. It must be mid range. Like, let me label it that. Where it's when it's
Doesn't
none of
have to
those
be.
things. Yeah, it doesn't have to be at all. And that's one thing I
None of
struggle
the
with
above.
too. Like when I'm putting my little tag descriptors on my Moxfield deck that I just entered in, and I'm going through and seeing what's available. I almost always just click on mid range out of habit. Like it's not. I just like I like mid range. I guess that's what it
Because
is.
it's not
Sure.
aggro or control.
Bingo.
So it's in
Right.
the middle.
Yeah, no, I like that as it, and really like I feel like the archetype phenomenon is kind of unique to like the competitive side of things. 'Cause that's what it like came out of, right? Like
Yeah, for sure.
competitive 60 card formats and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like you talked about battle cruiser, right? Like battle cruiser, what does that mean, right? Like that you're in it for a long game, you're in it to do splashy things, to do bomby things, like
Just
that's what
two ships passing in the night, buddy. Just
yeah,
we're
just
just
like
trading blows.
we're just gonna do our things, and whatever those things are, we're gonna do them, and we're built to do them. Whatever that may look like, right?
Yep.
So I kind of agree that I don't think you need to worry about archetype labels if you're in competitive either, personally, but you really, I mean, I think that applies even less the less you care about, CPDH, and you're just like jamming games. Like, who cares
Sure.
what your archetype is?
Yeah.
Just have a game plan, whatever that may be. If you're Dave, it's how do I lose the game the fastest with this commander? Right?
I gotta Fridge is cutting in on my territory. Fridge has a Flesh Reaver deck.
Mm-hmm.
He
Yeah,
is
I've played
he
against
is
it before.
dedicated to just murdering himself immediately. He
Yep.
is.
It's
I
hilarious.
can't believe I've got to fight for my throne out here.
Right. It's tough on these streets.
I thought this territory was going to be so uncontested, but I underestimated Fridge.
Fridge is
Dave's
back,
about
baby.
to drop a new Ian the Reckless deck incoming.
Yeah.
See, Fridge went like radio silent for a while. He said he was moving houses, but I think he went to like some school overseas to learn the way of the Alcadron, and
Yeah.
he came back better than ever. So yeah, I also think that like having these archetype descriptors, I don't know a better word than like vanity, but like sometimes it's just like a way to get eyes on your deck. You know what I mean? If you label it control, and if I'm new to PDH but I understand Moxfield because I play whatever format, I'm gonna go to Pauper Commander selection, and I'm just gonna, in the name, like where you can put in the name, I'm gonna put control. And whatever has control in the name, I'm gonna see what decks are available. Same with mid range, same with aggro, and just see what people have named their own decks.
And that's fair. Like I said, it's a good reference point, if nothing else. But I think you can go way too far down the rabbit hole of just being so focused on the label that it messes. I don't know. It's just something that people really like talking about and arguing over, and I think you could just spend more time talking about the deck instead.
Yeah.
So
I don't think. Well, I don't think so, and I hope that PDH doesn't ever get to a point where we have that rock paper scissors format where mid range beats aggro, and aggro beats control, and control beats mid range. Like, I don't ever want to get to that, because then that's what people will gravitate towards, and it'll, I don't know, I think that will limit some of the brewing going on.
This goes back to the multiplayer thing, right? Like, I think it's hard to do that because there's 3 other people. Like, you can't. Oh, 1 second.
Yep. Yeah.
There's just too many people, too many variables. Like, you can't have just like a turbo deck is going to have a hard time powering through 3 other decks. That's just how it is. Like a control deck's going to have a tough time controlling 3 other people. Like there's just so many people, so many variables that it's, I think it's crazy to think we'd ever get to a rock paper scissors 1v1 turn, like 1v1 formats, completely different story.
Yeah, absolutely. You almost look forward to that to a certain extent.
Yeah, like people make metagame decisions based on that.
Because then it's you feel better going to a 60 card tournament if you understand that, okay, there's it's rock paper scissors, or there's 3 best decks, and my main deck needs to stand up against all of them, but my sideboard needs to be able to divvy up and beat all 3 of them. So
yeah, and like that's why metagaming in PDH is also really hard. I'm not sure.
Hard. Super hard.
You can do it,
Sure.
just because you can prepare against like you can be like, I'm gonna run Sinkhole, I'm gonna run Cleansing Wildfire, I'm gonna run Reap and Sow, I'm gonna make sure no land R's ever stick around, and you could not see a single Gretchen or Weaver's deck all day, and then you're just like, my deck just has a bunch of bad cards that don't do anything, and so
yeah,
I don't remember
so
who I was
weird how
talking with this.
how the community shifts like that too, because when you brought it up earlier, Dave, when that Ilkor Pilgrim, Sadistic Pilgrim deck won the Rags to Riches tournament, the next event wasn't filled with those decks. It wasn't suddenly perceived as the best deck. If you go to 60 card Pauper and some deck wins the challenge out of nowhere, that a deck that nobody's heard of, you better believe the next week there's going to be 50 copies of that deck in the challenge because people want to know what's going on with it. It's perceived to be the best, etc.
I think that absolutely happened with Gretchen.
Oh,
when Puzzle took down the budget EDH tournament with a Pauper Gretchen deck, Gretchen exploded.
Yeah.
Like abruptly, there were a million Gretchen decks, and like she deserved it. She's outstanding, unbelievably powerful. I have to say that out loud because when that happened, I was very much on plan. Like I think Tetyova's better, and I think I was just wrong. I think Gretchen is better. Tetyova's still a powerhouse, but I will publicly admit here, I think Gretchen is the better deck at this point. But yeah, that definitely happened with Gretchen, but it didn't happen with Ellis Ilkor. You're right. I'm curious to see whether or not it will happen with TPI, because I think we sort of touched on pieces of this throughout our conversation. I think that TPI is a wildly powerful deck. I think that piloting TPI involves an enormous amount of skill.
Yes, 100%.
I think that Ryan was successful because he put a good deck together, and he's put in, I don't know, 100 hours of piloting this same deck with a lot of these same people, and figuring out what are the patterns, what do I need to stop, what can I let through, who do I need to pressure, when do I need to pressure them, like what kind of hands do I need to keep. We've talked a lot before about how everyone's land counts is too small,
Right.
and he looked at this two land opening hand and kept it, and was rewarded for that decision because he found the Springleaf Drum and then eventually drew into more lands.
Right.
Like that was a calculated decision that he made based off of all of the experience and all the skill he has gained piloting this deck. So I'm really curious to see whether or not TPI takes off, because this is, I think, the second tournament that's been won by a TPI. Someone won it with a Flicker combo list, and now we have Ryan winning this one with a straight up mid-range list. I don't know whether it's become the next big thing. Are we going to see a dozen TPIs in the next big tournament, or is it still just going to be the 2?
Right.
We'll see.
Yeah, and that's super interesting to me because the community, at least as an outsider, as a commentator, if you will, I don't see the community talking about that sort of thing. It just sort of happens. Like we had a lot more mid-range in Sanctuary 4 than we did, percentage-wise in Sanctuary 3, I believe. But was that in reaction to the turn 3 combo win, or was it just because mid-range has been on everybody's mind lately?
It's some of both. And I think, we talk about the last Philly tournament, there were a handful of TPI decks that were all lurking around the top tables most of the day too. And it was, TPI like I said, Ryan has top forward or done well at every tournament I think he's been in with TPI. Ross, who won the last Riches to Rags tournament with TPI, also top forward the previous Riches to Rags with TPI. So I think we won't ever really see the type of like dramatic, like this is such a huge meta share for one deck type thing very often, because I think it'll happen as you like it would happened with some of the early online tournaments because it was new and people were just jumping in and they're like, oh, I want to play the best deck.
Yeah,
this looks like the best deck.
Yep.
And so then people played it and whatever.
It could just be a sign that we have more brewers, more new players in the format, that we're seeing such a variety of decks too as well.
Yeah, I think we're getting more players, which you're going to get more diversity there, I would think, or makes sense.
Yeah.
But you're also getting people figuring out, like, who are in the format longer, know what they want to play, and kind of like sticking to their decks, their archetypes, and like a lot of people have like their own unique like niches they live in. Like, you know, Ryan loves mid-range decks. I mean, he's played TPI in all the tournaments, I think. But you know, even if he's not playing TPI, you know he's gonna play something mid-range, right?
Yep.
Like Puzzle's gonna play a combo deck.
Before TPI, Pauper was the Witherbloom
Yeah,
mid-range
big time.
guy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like Puzzle's gonna play a combo deck, whether it's Teshar or Gretchen or Malcolm. You know, like people just do the things they like doing, and so I think we probably won't see anything like that drastic again, but maybe.
I think people being able to have their niches and like live very comfortably within their niches, tournament after tournament, I think that speaks to a really healthy metagame.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
I'm
Go ahead.
gonna keep bringing Death Rattle until I find success somewhere.
Sure.
I'm bringing Control that back. We're doing it.
Bobby and Dave take over the world, control the world.
Yep.
Hell yeah.
I'm off for it. Floodgate and Death Rattle Oni.
Yeah.
That's what we're here for.
When Daybreak Games took over Magic Online, MTGO, before they did that, every Wednesday there would be a 5-0 dump. Basically, Wizards would take, for every format, they would take all the decks that 5-0'd a league and dump it online for everybody to see the deck lists. And you could always tell the health of, at least for Pauper, you could always tell the health of the format based just on that 5-0 dump alone. If there were, I've seen it as low as 17 different 5-0 decks, that's a horrendous meta. Whenever they ban something or a new set comes out, it'll go up to 41 different decks, 49, 50 different decks that 5-0'd this past week. So you can, it's sort of kind of what you're talking about, Dave, where you could just see the diversity without, I'm trying to figure out a way to say it. Like, you can just tell that there's diversity in the format itself based on what everybody's playing. Like, sure, there even in 60 card Pauper, just like PDH, there's going to be tier decks. There's going to be pillars of the format as far as decks go. But when you're constantly seeing new and different innovations, new and different commanders, different takes on established commanders, that's when you know, in competitive events, that's when you know it's a healthy meta. At least in my eyes.
I think so. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So I'm still trying to. Actually, let's do this first. I think, Mr. Bobby, we're about almost an hour and a half in. Didn't you have some things you wanted to talk about, Mr. B Fine?
Yeah. So we've talked about all this fun tournament stuff, and we just had a tournament. One more game. Chris is having the Common Cause coming up in April.
Yep, April 27th.
And so, so if you aren't signed up for that, sign up for that. It's gonna be awesome. I'm hoping to participate, and then the following month in May, we're gonna have the next Sanctuary open. So, May 18th, Saturday. It's gonna be later, depending on your time zone. 4 p.m. Eastern time.
Because they normally start at 1.
Yeah, so it'll be. Yeah, normally we tried 4 p.m. once. This is getting some other people in different time zones the ability to join in, play. You know, people across the world from us.
Yeah.
So a later start, 4 p.m. helps West Coast folks and others. everything else the same. $16 entry, 15 of it goes to the prize pool. Winner gets to work on a custom token. Prizes are all laid out. So all that information's on sanctuarypdh.com. But May 18th, put it on your calendars. I believe Brad's gonna try to play, isn't that?
Yeah, I'm gonna
The
throw
word
my
on the
hat
street?
in the ring this time. Let Dave and Derek take over the commentating booth for a while. I'll probably end up in there eventually, probably by round 3 or 4 when I go 0 wins and a bunch of losses. But that's fine. No, I'm looking forward to it. I don't know what deck. Ever since I decided I was gonna play in the Sanctuary event, without even knowing what day it was gonna be, I've been thinking about what deck to play. I've been play testing like every deck I have on Moxfield. Like, how does this feel? How does this feel? Oh, this is terrible. This is good. This is great. You know. And then I gotta like rein that back in because I'm like, wait, there's actually no opponents here, and I'm just like doing whatever I want to. So of course it's gonna be great. So I think I've got it narrowed down to 2 decks that I play quite a bit or that I'm quote unquote known for, and then 1 spicy deck that I'll probably pull an Alcadron and keep secret until the day of.
The best kind.
Yeah.
But
That's
yeah,
a great
no.
way to 0-4.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, you really have a lot to follow. You have to follow in Dave's footsteps. I don't know if you want to repeat that, but
I'm cool with it. I haven't played in an actual PDH competitive event with stakes on the line before, so I think it'd be fun. And I've been kind of craving it. Like I on Twitter and even in our Discord, I see people talking about, oh, I got, PDH is rolling at my LGS and we got this event here and this event here. My shop owner asked me to help out with it. And like, I just don't have that scene. Like I have an awesome LGS, but PDH is never going to develop there. So I want to try to get my my fix, my competitive fix here in the next Sanctuary V.
yeah, and maybe, I mean, you can just 4-0 win the finals, and you can work with me to make a really cool token. I don't know if you want to pull up the graphic I sent a little ways back in our little thread, but also wanted to show off. Ryan and I finished working on his custom token.
Yeah.
As you could expect, a soldier for TPI. Yeah, so
it's a really good looking soldier.
Yeah.
Are you gonna pull it up, or you want me to try to pull it up?
If you could pull it up, that would be great. Because
just cover up all our faces. I want to see it as like the entire YouTube thing. Is that possible?
Let me see here.
But yeah, he and I worked on it. It's a third path iconoclast soldier token, based off of some Warhammer 40K lore and stuff. I knew nothing about Warhammer 40K until talking to Ryan about his idea. And
so what is Skitari?
That is apparently some type of race or some type of faction in Warhammer. I'm not going to act like I know or have any idea, but
you know who does know? Ryan. You should DM Ryan about it.
Yeah,
that's true.
DM Ryan and ask him to explain Warhammer 40K to you.
Right
Just
now.
all of it.
Live.
Right now.
Yep.
And I know they have a whole channel dedicated to 40K in the Comic Connoisseurs Discord where they talk about it. So, but I'm really pleased with how it came out. Ryan likes it.
Yeah, it looks super dope, super awesome.
I'm super excited to see them. I've ordered them. They are being made, and then once they come out, Ryan will get a chunk. They'll go out to Patreon folks for Sanctuary, and then then we'll do some giving away on the server. So
heck yeah. Are you still doing the obviously not tonight, but are you still also doing the FNMs on the Discord?
Yeah, so I teased this like a week or two back in the chat. I'm gonna change how the FNM thing is going. I still want FNM to be like the day people play. I think it's the day a lot of people are free and expect to play. So definitely still planning on that, but I want to like have the giveaways be open to people who are just playing in general. So this isn't official yet. I got to figure it out. Top Deck just opened up a new feature that allows for like leagues in a way that like tracks just games, and you can like match make games and report report yourselves and report your own results. So I'm gonna have it like do monthly, like they're gonna be called leagues, but not really. It's just report all your games through Top Deck, and then at the end of the month, I'm gonna give out some number of sets of tokens. I'll probably give out like a foil set to the person who has like the most wins or the
Right.
best win percentage or something.
And these are
then
like
non-foil sets.
most wins in the FNM.
Just in general. So like
Oh.
that way anyone, some people like work Friday nights, right? So
Sure.
I want them to still have a chance to get tokens if they aren't part of the Patreon. Obviously, the Patreon's the easiest way to do it.
Right.
But yeah, I just want to make sure I'm giving out these tokens. They're really cool. I want people to use them,
Yeah,
love
super
them,
awesome.
show them off. So give them away to other people. Like I love them. So
Yeah, get your game results in there. That's a pretty cool feature. I like that.
yeah, so that I'll announce that here soon. My plan is to start for April and have it be like a monthly kind of thing.
Mhm.
But yeah,
I love that.
Yeah. I did want to ask Bobby real quick. It seemed like for a while you were doing the Sanctuary events like almost quarterly, but this one's like almost like 2 months after the previous one. Are you just trying to do them more often, or did this date just work out better for you?
yeah. So literally, it's all based on the costs of things. I'm not doing it to make
Fair.
money, but there's the judge cost for every event, and then the cost to make all the tokens.
Liam ain't cheap. We got to pay him every week to
Yeah,
just come talk to us on
Liam
Wednesday
is just
nights.
like,
I mean,
and he'll come after you. He's like, I'm gonna bust some kneecaps if you don't pay him on time. So, but no, so really, like, because of where the Patreon's at, and I'm super thankful for everyone who helps out. We like the costs work out so we can do it every other month right now, and so the plan is to do it every other month. And then I talked with Chris one more game because he's doing the Comic Con series. We're gonna just like alternate months and see if so there'll be hopefully be a PDH tournament happening every month for the foreseeable future.
ooh,
nothing
that is
set in
spicy.
stone,
Yeah.
but that's the game plan at least.
Yeah, I was going
he
to
and
try to
have
play in
talked
both
about.
of them, but I was going to try to play in the next Common Cause and the Sanctuary, but then I found out like 2 days after I said I was going to play in Common Cause, I found out that we have like immovable plans on that weekend. I was like,
That's a bummer.
boo.
I'm gonna be in Common Cause.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So are you bringing back Tony?
Hell yeah, I'm bringing back Tony. Kinda.
I might
got-
not be in Common Cause then.
No, playing Common Cause. Tony's a bad deck. You can beat it easily. He's 0-5 on for his entire career.
Right.
That means he's due for a win.
Due for a
That's what
hot
that
run.
means.
Is that how that works?
I think so.
I think so.
The laws
That's
of
what I'm
gonna say.
statistics. Sure. Why not?
Yeah.
What
But yeah,
were you
no, I'm
say
gonna
a
try
minute
to.
ago, Dave. I feel like I cut you off earlier.
I have no memory of what I was going to say a minute
And
ago.
then remembering that I cut you off, I actually just cut Bobby off. So what were you going to say, Bobby?
No, you're good. I'm looking forward. I'm gonna hopefully play in Common Cause. I mean, I'm excited for Riches to Rags, which is next weekend in Philadelphia, which is crazy. It's come up that quick.
Yeah, you're going to have a little
So-
paper event.
Yeah, that'll be a good fun
Gotta keep
time.
us
And
updated.
then there may or may not be some cool, fun pals content the couple days after. We'll see. Keep an eye out on the pals.
What?
so.
Okay,
That is
so
an
we're,
announcement. That's how
There's-
that's how you drop bombs.
I may or
Sneak it in there.
I may or may not have already asked you this question. I don't remember. There's 1 week in April where. Oh no, never mind. Never mind. It doesn't matter.
Wow.
Why? He said, "Wow."
What if I think it matters?
No, so I was thinking, like, I desperately want to watch. I need there to be more pals in my life. I desperately want to be watching more of it, but like I currently have a second job that works me, 5:30 to 7:30 on Tuesday and Thursday nights, and like it's a long commute. I'm usually not getting home on those days until like 8:30 or close to 9ish, and I was really excited because there's a week in April that I have off. And I was like, oh, maybe it's the week that Bobby's going to be at the Palace. And I got really excited. But then I remembered I have that week off from my main job, not from my
Not the
second
second
job.
job.
So I'm definitely every Tuesday and Thursday night in April, I'm coming home at like 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So
Yeah.
make sure that the second games, the good games.
I mean, and there'll always be VODs, right? Like you could always go back and rewatch.
Yeah, you can't
I-
chat
I
with a
could.
VOD though.
Yeah.
I never said that would be there. Just to be clear, I just said there could be some cool,
That's true. Just
yeah,
Stuff
piles of
happening?
content. Yeah.
yeah.
Whatever fresh new hell you're going to inflict on them.
Just
I'm ready. I want to be a part of it.
My body is ready.
I'm gonna be late.
I mean, just keep an eye out for what they're doing. They may have some cool
Yeah.
stuff. Who knows?
Yeah.
They always got cool stuff.
The cool stuff might be we found a way to get the island and plane chase and Clue and the Astrotorium and the Theros weapons and Vanguard all into the same game. That might be what happens.
I
Wait,
mean,
there's an
yeah.
LCI thing too, right? Delving into LCI.
Yeah.
could you imagine the pals playing like competitive PDH? I mean, how wild would that be, right?
I know that'd be crazy. Something like that would never happen.
Yeah, I can't imagine ever happening. That'd be weird.
Yeah. Like I feel like
I've
Sniff
s-
would probably play Gretchen or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have seen Jeremy win games with a Simic combo deck.
Yeah, who knows?
It's not
That'd
a-
be crazy, is all I'm saying. You know,
That'd be crazy.
That'd
Who
be
knows? Who
wild.
knows? It
Yeah.
would be. It would be wild.
Uh,
Who could even imagine such a thing?
Worst thing Alec has ever said. Worst thing Bobby has ever said. Back to back.
Back to back. This is
Uh,
a historic moment, apparently. Cool. We've been going a little while. You guys have any final thoughts about mid-range? Did we solve any questions here? Did we answer any questions? Figure anything out?
I think you very thoroughly answered all of my questions. I've said everything that I came here to say.
Yeah,
I
and
think
I
go ahead.
learned that my idea of mid-range is completely different from even your guys' idea of mid-range. Like I think I think that's sort of like the greater issue, if you will, with that archetype label is everyone just views it a little bit differently as to
Yeah,
what it
I th-
actually is.
I think the key to mid range's success is knowing what people are up against and like planning accordingly and having that game plan. You know, you kind of talked about it as value pile earlier, right? Like those decks, those types of decks fall under the category of or get classified as mid range more often than not. And I think they struggle sometimes because they aren't as clearly focused on a game plan. And I think when you look at like what Ryan did with TPI, it was focused, it had a game plan, and knew what it was doing. Those are the mid-range types of decks that are more likely to see success in the competitive setting.
Yeah.
And so I think over time that'll start to, you know, become more and more of what people do and people figure it out.
Yeah, and I think that's what Ryan captured with TPI specifically is the deck is powerful, you know, as a whole, the deck is very powerful, but it's powerful because it's efficient at what it's doing, and all those efficient things it's doing, they all synergize together into this, you know, one gigantic, powerful ball of is it stuff.
Yeah.
You heard it here first. Synergy is king.
Synergy is king.
Synergy is good.
Synergy is good. I find the
No one's ever said that about PDH before. I've invented that.
right here, right now,
Just
another
now.
historic moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I find it hard to balance the two. Like I'm usually super synergistic and not very powerful of a deck, or you know, efficient of a deck, or I'm like too efficient and like no synergy at all, and all the cards are just doing different stuff. So it's a very fine
I
line
love
to walk both of them.
synergy
Yeah, I do too.
because Freed from the Real plus Arbor Elf is some awesome synergy when you have a forest that taps for multiple blue pips. So
Oh,
I don't think that word means what you think it
It
means.
might not. Yeah, it might not.
synergy, baby, it's king.
Is that like the synergy between Floodgate and Islands?
Yeah,
that
it's very similar. like,
Synergy? Very
yeah,
similar.
synergy.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
all right.
So
Got it. It's all coming together.
It's all
Yep.
coming together. We hit 90 minutes and we delve into degeneracy. I see how it is. Fantastic.
I'm really impressed with Bobby for being able to hold that back for 90 minutes. He did a great job.
That's true. That's
we
true.
need to celebrate this moment with him.
Good job.
I
Bobby.
did it.
Yep.
I resisted
It
my
was
combo tendencies.
90 minutes before Floodgate and Combo got entered into the conversation on a meaningful level.
That's good. That's very impressive.
That is very impressive. Well, I think this went pretty well. We'll have to come up with something again to do next time in a whenever you guys want to do it. Couple months, couple weeks, couple days. I don't care. Whenever you guys want to do it, we'll find something to talk about. I do kind of like the archetype conversations. I was thinking about like we did with Combo, like how do you play against Combo, yada yada yada. Like I don't think there's really a way to like identify that you're playing against the mid-range deck necessarily and like understand like how to play against it. Like you just sort of like have to either suffer what they're doing or your deck just has to do what it's supposed to do and you'll take care of the problem.
I think mid-range has to do the figuring out how to play with against other people thing more than people need to figure out how to play
Yeah, exactly.
against it. So
Yeah.
and again, it just varies so wildly deck to deck because what it means to be mid-range could just whether that's 1-1 attacking TPI and its 1-1s is very different than attacking Abdel and it's like black Abdel Agent of the Throne and what it's trying to do. So
Yeah, and it's different than getting 6/3 menace skeletons with gut. Like,
right. So
Yes, the dreaded mid-range 6/3.
mid-range gut inspiring leader.
right. Wild.
But yeah, no, I thank you guys for having me on. It's always a fun time chatting with you guys and
Yeah, of course. It's been too long.
yeah. So
But cool. Yeah. You got anything else, Dave? You want to add in here before we get on out of here for the evening? Where did my
I'm
screen
spent.
go? There we go.
I'm out.
Yeah, I'm out too. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. It was a good conversation. We'll have to do it again soon. And yeah, everybody in the chat, have a good night. And we're going to get on out of here. See ya. Peace.
Cheers.
adios.